The way that I would begin to plan a book is to, on the one hand, walk the landscape to really soak myself in the subject and get a visual and a complete sensory sort of spectrum of what I'm going to be working with. And at the other hand, I'm also doing an awful lot of reading to make sure that I've studied all the species, I know what I'm looking for, and working out how it's going to look.
So here we have the original first edition of Sylva.
John Evelyn's Sylva, which was published in 1664. The full title being Sylva, or a Discourse of Forest Trees and the Propagation of Timber in His Majesty's Dominions. It is a book that looks at 55 species of trees, and it was written for the landed gentry and aristocracy of Great Britain to encourage them to replant their estates and to teach them really which trees to plant where and how to look after them and what timber they would gain from them and how they would use it. And so it's a forestry book. It's also teaching techniques of actually planting and nurturing and looking after your trees. And it's what we're going to notice is that it is not illustrated, and that was because at this time, apart from the fact that it had been very expensive to employ an artist to make the drawings, there was also a feeling that people knew what trees looked like. And this period of time, the audience that this book was written for would know what an oak looked like, and they'd know what an elm looked like. Whereas today, people are not quite so familiar with their local common trees. The new Sylva, which Gabriel, Hemery and I have co-authored and that I've illustrated, is aimed at a completely different audience in that it's aimed at for everybody. It's an in-depth and scholarly work which is looking at modern forestry and looking also at about 100 species of trees arranged into 44 groups. But it is written for everybody to be able to understand, anyone who is interested in trees, woodland management, ecosystems, the environmental studies, the landscape, natural history. Gabriel and I, in our celebration of this book, have given ours the title The New Sylva, or a Discourse of Forest and Orchard Trees for the 21st Century. It began about 3 years ago when Gabriel and Hemery and I met and started talking about the fact that we would both love to do a book on trees together. We were aware that the 350th anniversary of John Evelyn's Sylva was coming up, and we wished to do something very in-depth and celebratory of that book, and to produce a modern book on forestry that was a great celebration of trees. And we wanted to create something that was a piece of serious scholarship but also a beautiful art object that we could do. It's important to me that we have got a representation of the entire spectrum of life within the woodland, but also the life cycle of the tree. So I'm going from the seedling right the way through to the development of it and then its use in timber. And also, very importantly, I wanted to include the entire ecosystem. So it was very important to both of us that we have not just seedlings and whole trees and botanical studies of all of the parts of those trees, but also that we're looking at the entire spectrum of the landscape of trees growing together, of the environment, and that we're looking at the other plants, animals and insects that relate to that.
This is a mammoth task you've taken on with this new book.
In the end, I made 220 drawings of 205 different species, and I was responsible for collecting all of those myself, and for being able to draw them obviously in seasonal order, so that it was the plants and the seasons that were driving the order of the work. With most of the landscapes and the trees had to be done over winter to get the architecture of the species. And also spring, summer and autumn I had to be getting on with fruits and flowers. So as we were outside a lot in quite extreme conditions.
Visually, when you're looking at the plant, where do you begin? How do you manage to capture the depth without being completely confused?
With this drawing here in the middle, this is sweet chestnut tree. And what is characteristic of this species is that the bark can twist and create these very distinctive spiral patterns. And also in the spectrum of drawings in the book, I wanted to sometimes get very close to the tree, sometimes see the whole thing, and sometimes at the distance. So in this case, it made sense to come in close and look at the spiral nature of the bark, and also then an opportunity to try and get the flutter into some of the leaves there. Whereas, for example, this is a very ancient hazel coppice on Blenheim Palace estate, possibly 800-900 years old. I mean, it's huge, been there a very, very long time. So it makes a huge arc, the base of which would not have fitted in this room. So if I'd drawn it side on, I wouldn't have seen any form at all. So I went right to the end of it, and we're looking just at the end of the arc. And what I'm trying to do with every single drawing is capture what it's most important to say about that species, bearing in mind that no drawing can say everything, and therefore we've got to make an editorial decision. And I wanted to try and capture the dome-like form of the hazel as well. This one was quite hard to compose, because if I went in too close, it became a tangled mass. Came out too far, it was too fine detail to get any sense of power and presence. And with all of these drawings, I have very discreetly abstracted the tree by removing the haze of tiny stems that you see on the front and removing the haze that you'd see at the back. And in every single drawing of trees here, we've just got a section through the middle of the tree. But I hope the viewer doesn't realise that.
So Sarah, when you're working on a specific species, how do you choose your tree?
What I would do is walk around woodlands, go to an area where a species is quite prevalent, and I would walk around and look at a minimum of 30, 40 different examples of exactly the same species, even if that means walking for hours across a particular landscape. And then it means that I'm going to have a look at how that same species behaves in slightly different conditions and at different ages, and when it's affected by different environmental factors. And it also means that by looking at let's say looking at 30 different trees, means I can then see what's different between them and why, and what do they all have in common. So what is it about that species that really makes it, about that tree that tells me which species it is. So starting to look at the architecture, the way that the tree branches, but also maybe the smoothness or the roughness of the bark, the overall shape of the canopy, the dome of it. But by looking at several different examples, I see typically different ages as well, how the tree is going to mature. And then it means that I'll choose one that typifies what the species does in a very clear way, but then also has a fantastic character to it, a real presence and a stance. Because if the actual tree doesn't have a presence that kind of takes your attention, then the drawing isn't either.
And then also I wanted to try and bring the drawings alive so that I give my reader the experience, this is my aim, with looking at the book. I want them to feel they've gone on a walk, they've gone to the tree, they've grasped a branch, they've pulled it close towards them, and then I show them what they would see and what they would experience.